In 1964, a woman named Betty Jean Nowak in Dayton, Ohio, made supper every night for 23 years without opening a cookbook. She did not measure flour. She did not time anything in the oven. She knew by the sound of the skillet when the onions were ready. She knew by the smell of the bread when it was done. Her hands knew how much salt, how much butter, how much water, because her mother's hands had known the same thing, and her mother's mother before that. Number 44 on this list was made in kitchens across the Midwest every Thursday night, and nobody ever wrote the recipe down. Number 18 used 3 ingredients from the pantry and was on the table in 12 minutes. And number 1 is a meal that millions of American housewives made from memory, and when they were gone, the recipe went with them. These were not cookbook meals. They were not magazine meals. They were the meals your mother made with her eyes closed. Hit that subscribe button. Here are 60 easy meals that 1960s housewives made without a recipe that have completely disappeared. Chicken fricassee was the kind of supper that made a whole bird last 2 nights, and the broth from the bones could carry you into a third. Your mother cut the chicken into pieces, browned them in butter until the skin turned golden, then built a gravy in the same pan with flour, milk, and the drippings that clung to the bottom. Carrots and celery went in, the lid went on, and the kitchen filled with a slow, savory steam that told you supper was still an hour away. The technique was Old French, brought to American kitchens by way of farmhouse cooking and church supper recipes passed between women who never used the word fricassee. They just called it stewed chicken or chicken and gravy. By the 1960s, it was a weeknight staple in homes where a whole fryer still cost less than $1. The gravy was the thing. Thick, pale, peppery, clinging to egg noodles or spooned over rice. It was the part you remembered long after the woman who stirred it was gone. Buttermilk cornbread baked in cast iron was the bread that appeared at every meal, made so often that Grandma's hands moved without thinking. She stirred cornmeal with buttermilk, added a beaten egg, a pinch of salt, a bit of baking soda, and just enough bacon grease to make it rich. The cast iron skillet sat heating in the oven, getting smoking hot before she poured in the batter, which sizzled dramatically against the greased surface. That hot skillet created the crispy bottom crust that distinguished real cornbread from the sweet, cakey versions made by people who didn't know better. The bread baked until golden on top, then was flipped onto a plate and cut into wedges still steaming. This cornbread was meant for crumbling into beans, soaking up pot liquor, spreading with butter while still warm. Every grandmother's cornbread tasted slightly different. Some added sugar despite tradition, others kept it pure. But all of them made it without measuring, their hands knowing exactly what the batter should look like. Codfish cakes were the Friday breakfast that stretched salt cod into crispy patties that satisfied even families observing meatless mornings. Housewives soaked salt cod overnight to remove brine, then flaked the fish and combined it with mashed potatoes, egg, and seasonings until a mixture formed that could be shaped by hand. The cakes were dredged lightly in flour or breadcrumbs, then fried in hot fat until golden crusts formed around tender, fish-flecked centers. Served with eggs, toast, or simply on their own with a squeeze of lemon, these cakes turned preserved protein into something fresh and appealing. The dish required no written recipe because ratios adjusted based on how much fish was available and how many mouths needed feeding. Salt cod was economical and shelf-stable, making it a practical choice for families stretching budgets while still putting something substantial on breakfast plates. Poor man's steak transformed ground beef into something resembling expensive cuts families couldn't afford. A pound of beef was mixed with crushed crackers, egg, and seasonings, then shaped into oval patties meant to mimic sirloin steaks. These patties were dredged in flour and fried until crusty on the outside, then smothered in onion gravy made from the pan drippings. The crackers stretched the meat while keeping the patties tender and moist inside. Served alongside mashed potatoes, this meal gave working families the feeling of abundance without the price tag. Fathers sat at the head of the table cutting into their poor man's steak with pride. The gravy was essential, turning simple fried patties into something that felt celebratory. Grandmothers shaped these patties with hands that had made thousands before, never needing a recipe card. The dish appeared on payday when spirits were high and on lean weeks when creativity mattered most. Fried apples filled autumn kitchens with sweetness that rivaled any bakery. Grandmas peeled apples from backyard trees using knives worn thin by decades of use, their hands moving so fast the peels came off in single spirals. The slices went into a skillet with butter and brown sugar, or white sugar and cinnamon when brown sugar wasn't available, and cooked until tender and caramelized. Some grandmas added a splash of water to create syrup, while others let the apples cook down until thick and jammy. The dish appeared alongside pork chops, spooned over biscuits, or served warm with cream for dessert. Children hung around the kitchen during apple season, hoping to snatch a slice before supper. The recipe changed with whatever apples were ripe and how sweet Grandma wanted them that day. No measuring ever occurred. Sweetness was adjusted by taste, and cooking time was judged by color and texture rather than any clock. Christmas sugar cookies transformed ordinary kitchens into assembly lines of flour-dusted joy every December. Mothers mixed simple dough from butter, sugar, flour, and eggs, ingredients that cost almost nothing from pantry supplies on hand. Children crowded around tables with rolling pins and cookie cutters shaped like trees, stars, bells, and Santa Claus faces. The dough yielded dozens of cookies from a single batch, stretching holiday magic across days of baking and decorating. After cooling, the real fun began with bowls of colored icing and sprinkles that turned plain cookies into edible art projects. Kids took fierce pride in their creations, arguing over who made the prettiest star. These cookies were packed into tins for neighbors, brought to church socials, and left on plates for Santa. The recipe passed between generations without ever being written down, mothers teaching daughters by feel and memory. Sugar cookies cost pennies but created memories worth fortunes, proving that simplest traditions held deepest meaning. Bread pudding transformed stale loaves into Christmas dessert that wasted nothing while tasting like celebration itself. Families saved every heel and dried crust throughout December, knowing those hardened scraps would become holiday magic soaked in custard made from eggs, milk, sugar, and whatever spices the pantry held, usually cinnamon and nutmeg saved for special occasions. The pudding baked until golden and puffed, filling kitchens with aromas that announced Christmas had truly arrived. Some grandmothers stirred in raisins or dried apple pieces, others drizzled tops with hard sauce made from butter and powdered sugar when resources allowed. Served warm in thick slices, bread pudding proved that even stale bread could become something worth celebrating. The dish represented the fundamental philosophy of hard times cooking. Nothing wasted, everything transformed, scarcity turned into abundance. Hash from leftover roast was Monday dinner in homes across America, made by chopping Sunday's beef or pork into small pieces and frying it with diced potatoes and onions. Housewives eyeballed the proportions, using however much meat remained and enough potatoes to stretch it into a full meal. The mixture was pressed into a hot skillet with bacon drippings, then left undisturbed until the bottom formed a crispy brown crust. The flip required confidence, turning the entire mass to crisp the other side. Some housewives added a fried egg on top, the runny yolk becoming sauce for the hash beneath. Hash represented the practical wisdom of using every scrap of expensive meat rather than letting it spoil. Children grew up eating it without realizing they were eating leftovers, since the transformation was complete. This technique required no recipe because the proportions adjusted naturally to whatever remained from Sunday dinner. Hash has largely vanished from modern tables. Number 18. Stewed tomatoes and rice. A can of whole tomatoes, a cup of long-grain white rice, a little salt, and a bay leaf when the house had one. The tomatoes cooked down with the rice until everything absorbed together into something thick and tangy and deeply warm. In rural Louisiana parishes and the coastal counties of Georgia, stewed tomatoes and rice was Friday supper in Catholic households that could not afford fish but could not eat meat on Friday either. A can of whole tomatoes was 11 cents in 1955. A pound of rice was 20 cents. That is a hot meal for under 30 cents. If you grew up eating this, the smell is still in your memory, warm and sharp and simple, like safe ground under your feet. Think about what it took to put this on the table every Friday night, year after year, without complaint and without recognition. There was no recipe card because no recipe was needed. There was no timer because the cook knew by the steam when the rice was done. The women who made stewed tomatoes and rice for their families did not receive credit in any history book. They were not paid for the hours they stood at the stove. They did not receive a thank you most nights. They received empty bowls and children who went to bed full. In the farming communities of the Deep South and the coastal lowlands, this is how entire generations were fed, quietly, cheaply, by women who understood that a 30-cent pot of stewed rice and tomatoes made with care was indistinguishable from love. Water pie sounds like it shouldn't work. The people who made it in the 1930s mostly agreed, but they made it anyway because the alternative was no pie at all. An unbaked shell, 1½ cups of cold water, a quarter cup of flour, a cup of sugar, a few pats of butter, a little vanilla. That was it. The oven did the rest, almost an hour at heat, and then the pie had to chill completely before it would hold a slice. Versions appeared in American newspapers as early as the 1870s, when winter meant hens and cows slowed and eggs and milk grew scarce. The Depression simply returned it to tables that had moved on. What it tasted like was a mild, sweet, buttery custard, not rich, not complicated, but honest in the way only very simple food can be. She made it when there was nothing else, and she made it well. That matters more than most people realize. The French dip at home arrived in suburban kitchens in the early 1960s and stayed through the 70s as something that seemed fancier than it was. Cole's Restaurant and Philippe's, both in Los Angeles, have argued since 1918 about who first dropped a bun into pan drippings and called it lunch. But the genius was the cup of warm au jus beside the sandwich, turning eating into a ritual requiring technique. At home, thin-sliced deli roast beef, broth simmered with garlic and a bay leaf, crusty Italian bread, provolone under the broiler for 3 minutes. The dipping cup was just a coffee mug. Children who grew up with these sandwiches learned the correct procedure, a quick drag through the au jus, not a soak. The bread should still have resistance when you bit it. The ones who soaked were corrected. That small instruction, passed at the dinner table, is the kind of knowledge that goes quiet with the people who held it. She browned a pound of ground beef in the big skillet, spooned off most of the grease but not all of it, because that fat was the flavor, and then shook flour over the meat until the whole pan went thick and pasty. Milk went in next, slow, stirred constantly, and what came together was a rich, peppery gravy that clung to every grain of the instant rice she spooned onto the plates. Hamburger gravy over rice was the meal that appeared when the grocery money was running thin, but there were still mouths to feed. In some houses, it went over mashed potatoes, in others over toast. But the skillet technique was the same everywhere. Brown, flour, milk, stir, no broth, no wine, no stock from a carton. Just the drippings, the flour, and whatever milk was in the door of the refrigerator. The whole supper cost pennies and filled a kitchen with the smell of something that felt like enough. Some mothers added a can of cream of mushroom soup to stretch it further, and nobody ever complained. Chicken and slick dumplings was Sunday dinner comfort that required no recipe, only patience and hands that knew dough. Grandma would simmer a whole chicken for hours until the meat fell from the bones, creating rich golden broth that filled the kitchen with promise. She pulled the meat into shreds and returned it to the pot while mixing dumpling dough from flour, chicken fat, salt, and just enough broth to hold together. Rolled thin on a floured board and cut into strips, these slick dumplings went into the bubbling pot where they cooked into silky ribbons that soaked up chicken flavor. The result was neither soup nor stew, but something in between. Thick, hearty, and deeply satisfying. Every grandmother's dumplings tasted different because every grandmother's hands worked differently, rolling thicker or thinner. This was cold weather food, sick day food, company's coming food. The technique passed through watching, through standing beside grandma at the counter, through years of practice. Toffee cake was the breakfast centerpiece that appeared when company was expected, or Sunday mornings felt special enough to warrant something sweet. Housewives creamed butter with sugar until fluffy, added eggs one at a time, then alternated flour mixture with sour cream until batter came together smooth and thick. The streusel topping, butter, sugar, flour, and cinnamon rubbed together into crumbs, was scattered generously over the top before baking. The cake emerged golden and fragrant, its surface crackling with sweet cinnamon crumbs while the interior stayed moist and tender. Sliced into generous squares and served with coffee, this was breakfast as celebration, proof that weekday efficiency could give way to weekend indulgence. No recipe was consulted because proportions were learned through years of making, adjusting, and perfecting. Knowing by how batter fell from beaters, by how topping felt between fingers when everything was right. Johnny Marzetti was the casserole that sustained Ohio church suppers and school cafeterias for decades. Ground beef was browned with onions and green peppers, then combined with cooked egg noodles, tomato sauce, and shredded cheese in deep baking pans. The casserole baked until the cheese melted and the edges bubbled with tomato sauce turned slightly caramelized. Named after a restaurant owner's brother, the dish spread through Midwestern communities via church cookbooks and school lunch programs. Grandmothers made it when they needed to feed 20 people without breaking the family budget. The recipe was infinitely adjustable. More noodles when money was tight, more beef when times were good. Mushrooms appeared in some versions, olives in others, but the core remained beef, noodles, tomato, and cheese. Children grew up eating this at potlucks and came home asking their mothers to make it. The casserole represented community cooking at its finest, adapted by every family who made it. Milk gravy over toast was breakfast when pantries held little else but flour, milk, and stale bread. Grandmas made a simple white sauce by cooking flour and butter until smooth, then slowly adding milk and stirring until thick. The gravy was poured over toasted bread, or bread fried in butter when it was too stale to toast properly, creating a meal that filled bellies without requiring meat or eggs. Some called it poor man's breakfast, but grandmas called it making do with dignity. Children ate it without complaint because grandma's hands made everything taste like love. The dish required no recipe because every country woman knew how to stretch milk and flour into sustenance. It appeared during lean times between harvests, when the smokehouse was empty, but the cow still gave milk. This simple combination kept families fed through hard winters and harder years, proving that survival and satisfaction could come from the humblest ingredients. Peanut brittle shattered into golden shards across 1950s kitchen counters as housewives practiced the alchemy of turning sugar and peanuts into crunchy Christmas treasure. The process required nothing more than sugar, corn syrup, butter, baking soda, and raw peanuts, ingredients costing less than $1 but yielding pounds of candy. Mothers heated the mixture carefully, watching for the precise amber color that signaled perfection, then poured the bubbling mass onto greased cookie sheets. The baking soda created tiny air bubbles that gave proper brittle its distinctive texture, crisp but not tooth-breaking, sweet but not cloying. Children hovered nearby, waiting to break off irregular pieces still warm from cooling. The candy kept for weeks in tins, making it perfect for gift-giving on a budget. Some housewives added salt to enhance sweetness, while others experimented with different nuts. Peanut brittle represented practical ingenuity, transforming cheap ingredients into something far more impressive than its humble origins. Persimmon pudding turned the wild fruit that grew free on trees throughout the South and Midwest into Christmas dessert that cost nothing but time and knowledge. Families gathered ripe persimmons after the first frost sweetened them, pushing the soft orange flesh through sieves to create smooth pulp that became the pudding's base. Mixed with flour, sugar, eggs, milk, and warm spices, the batter baked into dense, moist pudding with a flavor unlike anything else. Sweet, slightly tannic, and deeply autumnal. The pudding was served warm with hard sauce or simply dusted with powdered sugar, its unusual taste marking it as special occasion food. Children learned to identify persimmon trees and judge ripeness, knowledge passed down through generations of foragers. The pudding connected Christmas tables to the land itself, celebrating what nature provided freely to those who knew where to look and when to harvest. Wacky cake was a chocolate cake housewives made during the war years and kept making through the 50s because it required no eggs, butter, or milk. The recipe was mixed directly in the baking pan, creating 3 wells in the dry ingredients where vinegar, vanilla, and oil were poured before water was added. The chemical reaction between vinegar and baking soda made the cake rise without eggs, producing a tender crumb. Housewives memorized the proportions because the recipe was so simple and the results so reliable. The cake was moist and chocolatey, perfect for school lunches or weeknight desserts when fancier cakes seemed like too much work. Some called it crazy cake, but every version used the same basic technique of mixing in the pan. Children never knew they were eating a Depression-era survival recipe because it tasted just as good as any layer cake. Wacky cake represented ingenuity, proving that limitations could produce something genuinely delicious. This clever cake has faded from memory. Number 19. Egg in a hole, a slice of bread, a circle cut from the center, butter in the skillet. The bread went in, then the egg cracked directly into the hole, and the whole thing cooked together until the white set and the edges of the bread turned golden and crisp. It had a dozen names depending on where you lived. Egg in a basket, egg in a frame, toad in a hole. In working-class neighborhoods across Pittsburgh and Cleveland, kids called it a bullseye egg. One egg cost about 8 cents in 1954. One slice of bread was a cent. That is breakfast for 9 cents. For a woman feeding 5 children before school, this wasn't a recipe. It was math. Every scrap got used. The bread circle you cut out got fried in the same butter and eaten right alongside the main piece. Nothing was wasted. Not ever. That was the rule in those houses back then, and it was not a rule anyone wrote down. Peanut butter cost about 10 cents a pound in the 1930s, making it one of the cheapest proteins a family could buy when meat was mostly out of reach. So it went into everything. And it went into bread. Peanut butter bread needed no yeast and no eggs. Flour, baking powder, brown sugar, peanut butter, and milk worked together into a dense, nutty loaf that baked for the better part of an hour. Still warm from the oven, sliced thick with a smear of homemade jam, it felt like a reward rather than a necessity. Your grandmother might have eaten it plain. She might have had butter on hers if there was any. She ate it because it was there and because she had helped make it, standing at the kitchen counter measuring peanut butter in big spoonfuls. That memory, the weight of the spoon, the smell of the oven, stayed with people long after the bread was gone. Nobody bakes it now. But before any of those diner sandwiches reached the suburban kitchen, something older had been feeding the Midwest for 50 years already. You couldn't make a loose meat sandwich by accident. You had to know why the meat was supposed to fall apart. Fred Angel opened the first Maid-Rite in Muscatine, Iowa in 1926. Seasoned ground beef cooked slow in beef broth until the liquid was almost gone. Not a patty, not sauced like a sloppy Joe, just loose, crumbly beef spooned onto a steamed bun with yellow mustard and dill pickles. No sauce, no ketchup. The meat was the thing, and the thing about it was restraint, a philosophy that spread across Iowa and into surrounding states through the 1960s and 70s, showing up at high school cafeterias for a quarter and church basements on Friday nights. If you had to ask what held the sandwich together, the answer was nothing. That was the point. The whole point of Swiss steak was violence, controlled, deliberate, necessary violence against a cheap cut of round steak that would otherwise chew like shoe leather. Your mother laid the meat on a cutting board, pounded flour into both sides with the edge of a heavy plate or a metal meat mallet, and kept pounding until the fibers broke down and the flour worked itself deep into the grain. Then into the hot skillet it went, browned hard on both sides, before she covered it with canned tomatoes, sliced onions, and sometimes a chopped green pepper. The lid went on, and the steak braised low and slow until it surrendered, fork tender, falling apart in a thick, tomatoey sauce that was almost a gravy. The name had nothing to do with Switzerland. It came from the technique of Swissing, an industrial process of smoothing cloth between heavy rollers, which described exactly what the pounding did to the meat. A 2-pound round steak cost under $1 in 1964, and when your mother was done with it, it tasted like something that should have cost $5. Fried potatoes and onions was the side dish that accompanied nearly everything and could become a meal when times got lean. Grandma sliced potatoes thin, not uniform like a machine, but varied by her practiced hand, along with sweet yellow onions cut into rings. Everything went into a cast-iron skillet with enough bacon grease to coat the bottom generously. She let them cook undisturbed until the bottom layer crisped, then stirred and pressed them down again, building layers of crispy and soft. The onions caramelized into sweet golden tangles, while the potatoes developed brown edges and creamy centers. No recipe existed because none was needed. Every country cook knew this technique by feel, adjusting heat by watching, seasoning by tasting. During lean times, this dish with cornbread became dinner. During harvest, it sat beside fried chicken and fresh vegetables. Either way, it tasted like home, like the kind of cooking that sustained families for generations without a single written instruction. Bacon dripping toast was the breakfast that proved nothing should ever go to waste in a proper kitchen. After frying bacon, housewives carefully poured the rendered fat into ceramic crocks kept beside the stove, building a supply of flavor that would season meals for days. Fresh bread was toasted crisp, then spread thick with warm bacon drippings while the fat was still liquid enough to soak into the bread. The result was savory, rich, and deeply satisfying. Toast that tasted like bacon without requiring additional strips. Salt was sometimes sprinkled on top, though the drippings often carried enough seasoning on their own. Children ate these slices with gusto, unaware they were consuming what thriftier times demanded. The technique required no measurement because housewives spread drippings the same way they spread butter, by feel, by appetite, by what the morning called for. This breakfast has vanished partly from changing health concerns and partly because few kitchens still maintain dripping crocks. Shepherd's pie without the lamb was how American grandmothers adapted the British classic to budgets and tastes. Ground beef was browned with onions and mixed with whatever vegetables were available: peas, carrots, corn, green beans, then spread in a baking dish and topped with mashed potatoes. The whole thing baked until the potatoes turned golden brown and the filling bubbled up around the edges. Grandmothers made this when they needed one dish to serve as the entire meal, complete with meat, vegetables, and starch. The mashed potato topping could be piped fancy for company or simply spread with a fork for Tuesday supper. Families ate it straight from the baking dish, scooping portions that included every layer. The dish used up leftover mashed potatoes and any vegetables that needed cooking. 1 pound of beef beneath all those potatoes and vegetables fed 8 people satisfied. This was the cooking of women who never wasted anything. Fried salt pork with gravy was breakfast that fueled hard labor on farms across the country. Grandmas sliced the cured pork thin, soaking it in water or milk to draw out excess salt before frying. The slices went into a cold skillet that heated slowly, rendering fat that would be used for gravy while the meat crisped at the edges. Once the pork was brown and chewy, it was set aside while flour went into the drippings. Milk was added gradually, the gravy thickening into something creamy and rich with pork flavor. The meat was served alongside the gravy, both poured over biscuits or fried potatoes to create a meal that stuck to ribs through hours of fieldwork. Salt pork was cheaper than bacon and kept longer in smokehouses, making it the everyday meat of country families. The gravy stretched a few slices into enough food for a table full of hungry workers, proving that grandmas understood economy and flavor equally. Caramel corn filled large bowls at 1950s Christmas gatherings, its golden clusters disappearing faster than housewives could replenish them. Freshly popped corn was spread across baking sheets, while mothers cooked butter, brown sugar, and corn syrup until the mixture bubbled and turned deep amber. The hot caramel was poured over the popcorn and stirred frantically before it could harden, coating every kernel in sticky sweetness. Baking dried the coating into a crunchy shell that shattered between teeth and stuck deliciously to molars. Some housewives added peanuts for extra protein and crunch, creating a treat that doubled as a snack and a candy. Children hovered around the kitchen during the cooking process, knowing that the crispy bits left on the pan were theirs to claim. Caramel corn cost pennies to make. Popcorn was cheap, and the caramel required only sugar and butter. Yet it disappeared at parties as fast as expensive store-bought treats. Packed into tins and bags, it became a gift that neighbors actually wanted to receive. Wilted lettuce salad appeared on dinner tables. when garden lettuce grew faster than families could eat it fresh. Housewives tore crisp lettuce into a large bowl, then poured hot bacon drippings mixed with vinegar and sugar directly over the greens. The heat wilted the lettuce just enough to soften it, while the dressing created a tangy sweetness that balanced the smoky bacon flavor. Crumbled bacon pieces and sliced hard-boiled eggs topped the salad, transforming simple greens into something substantial. This was country cooking that required no recipe because farm wives had made it for generations. The proportions of vinegar to sugar varied by family taste, some preferring more tang while others liked it sweeter. The bacon grease had to be hot enough to wilt, but not so hot it cooked the lettuce completely. The salad was served immediately while still warm, before the lettuce became too soft. This dish has largely vanished as fresh salads and bottled dressings became standard fare. Number 14. Hoover stew. A box of macaroni, a can of tomatoes, 2 or 3 hot dogs sliced into rounds, and a can of corn or peas. Everything thrown into one pot, brought to a boil, and simmered together until the pasta finished cooking and the broth thickened slightly from the tomato juice. Named after President Herbert Hoover, this stew was born in the soup kitchens and hobo camps of the 1930s. By the 1950s, it had moved into working-class kitchens across the industrial Midwest, particularly in the mill towns of Ohio and Pennsylvania, where factory families made it on the weeks the shifts ran short. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't supposed to be. A package of hot dogs cost 35 cents in 1954. A box of macaroni was 11 cents. A can of tomatoes was 11 cents. A can of corn was a dime. That is a pot of hot food for under 70 cents, enough to fill 8 people. Nobody left the table hungry after Hoover's stew. That was enough. You did not tell people what was in it. That was the first rule. The second was to let them eat a full slice before they asked. Tomato soup cake had been in Campbell's recipe archives since 1922, spreading through Depression kitchens because a 10-cent can of condensed soup replaced the milk, eggs, and fat that bakers couldn't afford. The soup's thickened starch and natural pectin held moisture in the crumb the way proper fat would, and the spices, cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, allspice, covered any trace of tomato completely. What came out was a dark, warmly spiced cake that people identified as carrot cake or spice cake and reached for a second slice of before they ever asked. Sylvia Plath baked her mother's version and wrote home from England asking how many ounces were in an American can. The British cans ran larger and her cake came out too wet. A recipe that crossed oceans and almost no one recognizes it from the name alone. The Reuben Made at Home told you something about the household's ambitions. You weren't making one unless you were committed. Corned beef from the deli counter, not pre-sliced lunch meat. Swiss, not American. Sauerkraut drained and pressed dry. Thousand Island or Russian dressing depending on which side of the argument you fell on. Dark marble rye buttered on the outside. Everything into a cast iron skillet, weighted, flipped once, pulled when the cheese went glossy and the bread reached walnut shell brown. The origin debate, Arnold Reuben's restaurant in New York, 1914, or Reuben Kulikovsky at the Blackstone Hotel in Omaha in the 1920s, was irrelevant to the families making it on Friday nights. What mattered was the press of the sandwich, the way everything melted together under weight and heat into something that tasted like it had always existed. Without the weight and the heat, you had ingredients. That distinction was the whole recipe. Welsh rarebit turned a few slices of bread and a block of sharp cheddar into something that felt almost like a real sit-down dinner, and it took less than 15 minutes from stove to table. Your mother grated the cheese by hand, melted it slow in a saucepan with a splash of milk, a spoonful of dry mustard, and a few shakes of Worcestershire sauce until it went smooth and glossy. That golden sauce got poured thick over toast that had been browned under the broiler, and the whole house smelled like a pub kitchen, warm and sharp and rich. The dish had roots going back to 18th century Wales, where it was called cos poby, toasted cheese, and it crossed the Atlantic as a tavern supper before American mothers claimed it for weeknight duty. Despite the name, there was never any rabbit in it. Just cheese, bread, and the kind of quick thinking that turned almost nothing into a meal that everybody cleaned their plate for. Rabbit stew was the reward for successful hunting, when wild cottontails were plentiful in fields and brush piles. Grandma would joint the rabbit into pieces, brown them in bacon fat, then add water or stock along with whatever vegetables the root cellar provided: potatoes, carrots, onions, turnips. The stew simmered for hours until the rabbit meat turned tender enough to fall from the bone, its mild flavor infusing the broth. She thickened the liquid with a bit of flour mixed with cold water, creating gravy that clung to every piece of meat and vegetable. Wild rabbit was leaner than domestic meat, requiring slow cooking and plenty of fat to keep it from drying out. The stew appeared throughout winter when fresh meat was scarce, but small game remained available to those who knew how to hunt and prepare it. No recipe guided the process. Grandma added vegetables by eye, thickened by feel, seasoned by taste, cooking until her experience told her it was done. Soft-boiled eggs with toast soldiers was the breakfast ritual that turned ordinary mornings into small celebrations. Housewives lowered eggs carefully into simmering water, counting minutes instinctively until whites set firm while yolks remained gloriously runny. The eggs were nestled into ceramic cups, their tops sliced off with quick knife strokes to reveal the golden treasure inside. Toast was cut into strips, the soldiers meant for dipping into the liquid yolk, each strip emerging coated in rich yellow. Children delighted in the process, the ceremony of the cutting, the satisfaction of the dipping, the creamy reward of each bite. Housewives needed no timers because they knew egg doneness by intuition developed through hundreds of mornings standing at stoves. The dish was breakfast as theater, simple ingredients elevated through technique and presentation into something that felt special without costing extra. Porcupine meatballs got their name from the rice that poked out like quills after cooking. Ground beef was mixed with uncooked rice, egg, onion, and seasonings, then shaped into balls and nestled into baking dishes. Tomato sauce or soup was poured over the top, and everything baked covered until the rice cooked through and the meatballs turned tender. The rice absorbed the tomato liquid as it cooked, swelling and poking through the meat in ways that delighted children and stretched the meal further. 1 pound of beef made a dozen large meatballs when the rice did its work, enough to feed a family with plenty of sauce for sopping with bread. Grandmothers made these when they wanted something playful without extra effort. The dish could simmer on the stovetop or bake in the oven, adapting to whatever else was happening in the kitchen. Children loved naming the funny-looking meatballs, while parents appreciated how far the ingredients stretched. Chicken and dumplings stretched one bird into a feast that satisfied everyone at the table. Grandmas started with old hens past their laying days, birds too tough for frying but perfect for the long, slow simmer that turned their meat tender and their bones into rich broth. The whole chicken went into the pot with onion, celery, and whatever herbs grew near the back door. After hours of simmering, the meat was pulled from bones by hands that knew every joint and sinew. The dumplings were mixed by feel, flour, lard, and buttermilk combined until the dough felt right between fingers. Dropped by spoonfuls into bubbling broth, they puffed into pillowy clouds that absorbed the chicken's essence. Some grandmas rolled their dumplings flat and cut them into strips, while others preferred the drop method their own grandmothers used. The dish needed no seasoning beyond salt and pepper because the bird and broth provided everything. Christmas morning. Cinnamon rolls filled 1950s kitchens with an aroma so intoxicating that children tumbled out of bed before parents could finish their coffee. Housewives prepared the dough the night before, letting it rise slowly in the refrigerator while families slept. Before dawn, they rolled it flat, spread soft butter across the surface, then showered it with brown sugar and cinnamon until the dough looked like sweet earth. The rolls were sliced, placed in buttered pans, and baked until golden while children tore into stockings and presents. Hot from the oven, the rolls were drizzled with simple powdered sugar glaze that pooled in every crevice. The ingredients cost pennies. Flour, yeast, butter, and sugar were pantry staples in every home. Yet these rolls felt like pure indulgence, sticky and warm and perfect for Christmas morning chaos. Kids would eat them standing up, glaze dripping down their chins as wrapping paper flew. Cinnamon rolls became the taste of Christmas morning itself, inseparable from the joy of the day. Oatmeal cookies studded with raisins became the Christmas cookie that stretched a handful of ingredients into dozens of treats that lasted for weeks. Grandmothers creamed together whatever fat they had, butter if lucky, lard if not, with brown sugar and molasses, then folded in oats that cost pennies per pound and provided genuine nutrition. Raisins added sweetness and chewiness, while cinnamon and nutmeg made each cookie taste like the holidays. The dough was forgiving, tolerating substitutions and adjustments that more finicky recipes wouldn't allow. Baked until golden on the edges but still soft in the centers, these cookies improved over several days as flavors melded together. Packed into tins and given as gifts, oatmeal cookies showed that thoughtfulness mattered more than expense. Children grabbed them for breakfast, lunch, and snacks, their heartiness providing real sustenance between meals. The cookies represented practical Christmas baking, delicious enough for celebration, sturdy enough for everyday eating. Bread pudding transformed stale bread into dessert through a technique passed from generation to generation without written instructions. Housewives tore dried bread into chunks and soaked them in a mixture of milk, eggs, sugar, and vanilla until softened completely. The exact proportions depended on how much stale bread had accumulated. Cinnamon and nutmeg added warmth, while raisins provided bursts of sweetness throughout. The mixture was poured into a buttered baking dish and baked until puffed and golden, the top forming a slight crust while the inside stayed custardy. Some families served it warm with cream poured over, others preferred it cold the next morning for breakfast. The dish represented the waste-nothing philosophy that defined post-war kitchens. Every scrap of bread found purpose in this humble dessert that tasted far more elegant than its origin suggested. Bread pudding required no recipe because every housewife knew by touch when the bread was properly soaked and by sight when the pudding was done. Number 17. Peanut butter and crackers. Not a sandwich. A sleeve of saltines and a jar of peanut butter, and the cracker you spread thick with a butter knife and ate standing over the kitchen sink at 3 in the afternoon, when breakfast was a long way off and supper hadn't started yet. A jar of peanut butter cost 22 cents in 1951. A box of saltines was a dime. In the coal mining communities of southern West Virginia, peanut butter and crackers went into lunch pails alongside thermoses of black coffee every single morning. In farmhouses across Ohio and Michigan, it was what children ate between school and chores. Simple, cheap. It filled you and kept you going for hours on not much money. Decades later, people who ate this as kids still reach for it without thinking. That is not nostalgia. That is the way your body remembers what actually worked. Number 15. Tomato gravy on biscuits. Bacon drippings in the skillet, a spoonful of flour stirred in until it browned, then a can of crushed tomatoes poured over the roux. Salt, pepper, a pinch of sugar, poured over fresh biscuits still hot from the oven. In the farming communities of eastern Tennessee and the Piedmont counties of North Carolina, tomato gravy was breakfast on the days the salt pork ran out. It was also supper on the days a new supply hadn't arrived yet. A can of tomatoes was 11 cents. A bag of self-rising flour was 20 cents and made biscuits for a full week. A woman named Loretta Hensley raised 7 children on a tenant farm outside Morristown, Tennessee in the early 1950s. She made tomato gravy every Monday morning after the weekend had used up the meat. Her children thought Monday breakfast was the best meal of the week. She let them believe it. That was the kind of quiet generosity those women were capable of. Vinegar pie belonged to a category depression cooks called desperation pies, shells filled with something other than fruit when fruit was gone and money was scarcer. White or cider vinegar, sugar, flour, butter, sometimes an egg if you had one, mixed smooth and poured into an unbaked shell. Baked until set and barely jiggly at the center. What came out was a tart sweet custard with the texture of chess pie, soft and clean and worth a second slice. The vinegar pulled back from its sharpness in the heat and left something that tasted closer to lemon than anything acidic, which was the entire point. Lemon was expensive and sometimes unavailable. Vinegar was always in the house. You never said what was in it before they tasted it. If you did, they put down their fork. If you didn't, they asked for the recipe. The difference between a depression cook and everyone else was knowing which secrets to keep until after dessert. Before anyone questioned whether a frozen fish stick belonged between two slices of white bread, there was a generation of children who knew exactly how good it was. If the roast was Sunday and the gravy was Monday, the fish stick sandwich was Wednesday. Gorton's of Gloucester, Massachusetts, which introduced frozen fish sticks during the 1950s as part of the first wave of foods marketed during the television advertising boom, crispy and mild and completely acceptable to children who refused anything that smelled too strongly of the sea. Sticks baked until the coating cracked, transferred hot onto soft white bread with tartar sauce from a jar. The bread steamed slightly against the heat, which was the whole point. That warmth transferring through, making it part of the meal instead of just its container. These were after-school sandwiches, lunchbox sandwiches, the sandwiches of households where the freezer did serious work. They went quiet when families decided frozen fish sticks were beneath them. If you told someone today that your mother baked a cake with a can of Campbell's tomato soup, they would look at you like you had lost your mind. But in the 1960s, tomato soup cake was a real thing that real women made and real families ate after supper on a Wednesday. The recipe had been circulating since the Depression, when Campbell's printed it on the label to sell more soup, and it worked because the tomato gave the cake a warm, spiced flavor, not unlike carrot cake. Moist, dense, with a sweetness that came from the sugar in the soup itself. Most mothers added cinnamon, cloves, and raisins, then finished it with cream cheese frosting, and if you did not know the secret ingredient, you would never have guessed. The cake doubled as a supper dessert, something sweet to end a cheap meal on a full note. It vanished when convenience cake mixes made from scratch baking feel unnecessary, and with it went one of the strangest and most satisfying tricks the American kitchen ever produced. Tomato gravy over biscuits was summer's answer to milk gravy, using the garden's overflow when fresh tomatoes hung heavy on the vine. Grandma would chop ripe tomatoes roughly, not measuring, just eyeing what the meal needed, then cook them down in bacon drippings until they broke apart into thick sauce. Sugar was added by the pinch to cut the acid, flour by the handful to thicken, salt and pepper by instinct alone. The gravy turned a beautiful sunset orange, chunky in some spots, smooth in others, depending entirely on how Grandma felt that morning. She spooned it hot over fresh buttermilk biscuits, the tomato juice soaking into the flaky layers. This dish appeared during tomato season only, when the garden produced faster than families could eat or preserve. There was no winter version, no substitute, just the brief window when homegrown tomatoes made this possible. The recipe died with the grandmothers who never wrote anything down, trusting their daughters would watch and remember. Creamed eggs on toast was the weekday salvation that appeared on breakfast tables when time was short and pantries were lean. Housewives would melt butter in a skillet, whisk in flour until smooth, then slowly add milk while stirring constantly until a silky white sauce formed. Hard-boiled eggs were chopped roughly and folded into this creamy base, seasoned with salt, pepper, and sometimes a dash of paprika for color. The mixture was spooned generously over slices of toasted bread, creating a breakfast that was filling without being fancy. Children loved the mild flavor, while husbands appreciated something warm before heading to work. The dish required no measuring because every housewife knew the feel of proper roux consistency, how the sauce should coat a spoon. It stretched expensive eggs further while providing protein that lasted through morning chores. This was breakfast born from instinct rather than instruction, the kind of cooking that happened automatically when dawn broke. Salisbury steak with mushroom gravy turned ground beef into something that felt like Sunday dinner on a Wednesday budget. Beef was mixed with breadcrumbs, egg, and minced onion, then shaped into oval patties and pan-fried until browned on both sides. The patties were removed while mushrooms and more onions were sautéed in the drippings. Then flour and beef broth created a rich brown gravy. The steaks returned to the pan to simmer in that gravy until everything melded together into pure comfort. This wasn't cafeteria food, despite what school lunches later did to the name. This was homemade elegance on a working-class budget. Grandmothers served it over egg noodles or mashed potatoes, the gravy pooling in delicious puddles. Families who couldn't afford real steak ate this with the same satisfaction, never feeling deprived. The mushrooms stretched the gravy while adding earthiness that made the dish taste more expensive than it was. Tomato gravy turned summer's abundance into comfort that warmed even on the hottest days. Grandmas started with bacon grease in a cast-iron skillet, stirring in flour until it browned and adding fresh tomatoes that fell apart as they cooked. The mixture thickened into a tangy, savory gravy that was nothing like the brown gravies of winter. Some grandmas added sugar to balance the tomatoes' acidity, while others preferred the sharper taste that came from fully ripe fruit straight from the garden. The gravy was poured over biscuits for breakfast or supper, the tomato juices soaking into the bread and turning it soft and flavorful. During canning season, when tomatoes overflowed baskets, this gravy appeared at nearly every meal. It used fruit too soft for canning and too ripe for slicing, proving that nothing from the garden ever went to waste in kitchens where grandmas stretched every harvest. Chocolate fudge squares stacked high on holiday platters were the crowning achievement of 1950s Christmas candy making. Housewives stirred pots of sugar, cocoa, butter, and evaporated milk over careful heat, watching for the softball stage that meant the mixture would set properly. The process required constant attention. Turn away, and the fudge could scorch or crystallize into grainy disappointment. Children learned patience watching mothers stir and test, dropping small amounts into cold water to check consistency. Once poured into buttered pans, the fudge set into dark, glossy blocks cut into perfect squares. Some recipes added walnuts for texture, others swirled in marshmallow cream for a lighter version kids loved. The ingredients cost pennies, but the result tasted like something from an expensive candy shop. Families guarded fudge recipes jealously, passing them down through generations with handwritten notes about timing. Chocolate fudge proved that Christmas extravagance came from skill rather than spending. Applesauce cake used the fruit that families preserved all autumn long to create moist, richly spiced Christmas cake without expensive butter or eggs that would stretch the budget too thin. Grandmothers stirred thick, homemade applesauce into batter along with flour, sugar, baking soda, cinnamon, cloves, and whatever dried fruit or nuts they could spare from the pantry shelves. The applesauce kept the cake incredibly moist while adding natural sweetness that reduced the sugar needed for a truly satisfying dessert. Baked in loaf pans or tube pans, depending on what families owned, these cakes often traveled to church socials and family gatherings wrapped carefully in clean tea towels. Some versions included a handful of raisins, plumped in warm water. Others stretched further with rolled oats stirred into the batter for hearty texture. The cake improved over several days as flavors melded together. Rice pudding was a dessert housewives made by combining leftover rice with milk, sugar, and eggs, then baking until set and creamy. The dish used rice that would otherwise sit in the icebox until it spoiled, transforming it into something sweet that children begged for. Housewives added cinnamon, nutmeg, and raisins by instinct, knowing the flavor profiles their families preferred. Some made it stovetop, stirring constantly until thick, while others preferred the oven method that required less attention. The pudding could be served warm or cold, making it versatile for different occasions. Leftover rice from weeknight dinners found new purpose in this economical dessert that tasted rich despite costing almost nothing extra. The technique passed through families without recipes because proportions adjusted based on how much rice was available. Housewives judged doneness by jiggling the pan and knowing when the center was set but still creamy. Rice pudding appeared at potlucks and family dinners throughout the 50s. Number 21. Fried potatoes and onions, a cast iron skillet, bacon drippings, 3 or 4 potatoes sliced thin, half an onion, salt, pepper, and thyme. Your mother didn't measure anything. She had made this so many times her hands knew what to do before her mind caught up. The potatoes went in first, the onions second, and the whole pan sat over medium heat until everything browned in layers and the kitchen smelled like something worth sitting down for. A 10-pound bag of potatoes cost 53 cents in 1952. In farm communities across Missouri and Indiana, fried potatoes and onions was not a side dish. It was the meal. A woman from a tobacco farm outside Bowling Green, Kentucky, once said that her family ate fried potatoes for supper 4 nights a week for 15 years and never once complained. You probably remember this. Maybe your family called it something different. The dish didn't need a name. It needed a skillet and 20 minutes. Nothing stale went to waste in a Depression-era kitchen, and stale bread went into the pudding dish. Slices or cubes soaked in warm milk, sugar, vanilla, cinnamon, and nutmeg, pressed down until the bread had absorbed everything it would take. Then into a moderate oven until the top was set and slightly crisped, and the inside had gone soft and custardy and smelled like something that cost far more than it did. A thin vanilla sauce went over the top, water, sugar, flour, and vanilla cooked together on the stovetop, because the pudding was good alone but better with something warm poured at the table. Church suppers across the rural South and Appalachia served bread pudding by the panful, the kind of dish that appeared whenever a crowd needed feeding on a budget that didn't stretch. It held people. The grandmothers who made it are gone, and the bread pudding they made tasted different from any version you'll find now. Nobody can explain exactly why. Nobody told you tuna and apple belonged together. You had to discover it by accident at a covered dish supper, eating before anyone explained what was in it. The combination appears in junior league cookbooks and church recipe collections from the era. Star-kissed, drained and flaked, folded into Hellmann's with celery, lemon juice, and half a Granny Smith chopped small. Skippy and Hellmann's ran joint advertising campaigns in the 1970s Los Angeles Herald promoting sweet and savory combinations, validating what home cooks had already figured out. It went on white bread, or sometimes whole wheat if the household had tipped toward the health food movement. The apple browned fast if you didn't move quickly. You made it and ate it that afternoon. She made it every Tuesday after the grocery run. Nobody makes it on Tuesdays anymore. Before casseroles took over every weeknight, your mother made tuna roll-ups. And if you have not thought about them in 40 years, this is the one that will stop you cold. She rolled out biscuit dough thin, spread canned tuna across it like filling on a jelly roll, and rolled the whole thing up tight before slicing it into rounds. Those rounds went into a baking dish, got covered with cream of mushroom soup thinned with a little milk, and baked until the biscuit dough puffed golden and the cream sauce bubbled around the edges. The meal came together in 20 minutes and cost almost nothing. A can of tuna, a tube of biscuit dough, or a batch from scratch, and a can of soup. You ate it with mashed potatoes and green beans from a can, and the plate looked like something out of a women's magazine from 1962. Nobody makes tuna roll-ups anymore. Most of those women are gone now, and the dish slipped away with them so quietly that nobody even noticed. Poke salad with eggs was the dangerous spring tonic that required knowledge passed only through careful teaching. Pokeweed grew wild along fence rows, its young shoots emerging as the first spring greens when bodies starved for fresh vitamins after winter. But poke was poisonous if prepared wrong. Grandma knew to pick only the youngest shoots, boil them in at least 2 changes of water to remove toxins, then drain and fry them in bacon grease. She scrambled eggs directly into the cooked greens, the yolks enriching what would otherwise be bitter and medicinal. No cookbook ever included proper poke preparation because the knowledge was too dangerous for inexperienced readers. You had to learn which plants were young enough, how many water changes were truly necessary, when the greens were safe. This dish represented the ultimate grandmother knowledge, survival wisdom that could feed you or kill you depending on expertise that existed only in the hands of those who learned it young. Johnny cakes were the cornmeal pancakes that connected 1950s breakfast tables to colonial American kitchens through an unbroken chain of women who never wrote down measurements. Housewives mixed cornmeal with salt, sometimes adding a touch of sugar, then stirred in just enough boiling water or milk to create batter that held together without being stiff. Spoonfuls were dropped onto greased griddles, pressed flat, and cooked until edges browned and surfaces dried enough to flip. The cakes emerged crispy outside, dense and corny inside, nothing like the fluffy wheat pancakes that would later dominate American breakfasts. Served with butter and maple syrup or alongside bacon and eggs, Johnny cakes provided substantial fuel that lasted through morning labors. The recipe existed nowhere on paper because it lived entirely in practice. Knowing by sight when batter was right, by sound when griddles were hot enough, by smell when cakes were done. Loose meat sandwiches fed entire Midwestern towns before fast food chains existed. Ground beef was crumbled into skillets and cooked until browned, then seasoned with onion, a splash of Worcestershire sauce, and sometimes a spoonful of mustard stirred right into the meat. The mixture stayed loose and crumbly, never bound together like meatloaf, giving it a texture that was uniquely satisfying. Spooned onto soft hamburger buns and topped with pickles and yellow mustard, these sandwiches became the affordable alternative to proper hamburgers. Small-town diners and church basement suppers served them by the hundreds. A single pound of beef made enough filling for 8 sandwiches when stretched properly with onion. Working families relied on them because the filling could be made ahead and reheated without losing quality. Children begged for them at school functions while parents appreciated how far the meat stretched. This was community food that brought people together over something simple. Creamed corn was summer captured in a skillet, made from ears picked just hours before cooking. Grandmas cut kernels from cobs using sharp knives, then scraped the cobs with the blades back to extract the milky liquid that would thicken the dish naturally. The corn went into a skillet with butter, cooked slowly until the starch is released and the mixture became creamy without any flour or cream added. Salt and pepper were the only seasonings because fresh corn needed nothing else to taste like pure summer sweetness. Some grandmas added a splash of bacon grease for richness, while others kept it simple with just butter. The dish appeared at every summer supper during corn season, served alongside fried chicken, sliced tomatoes, and whatever else the garden provided. Children helped shuck corn on back porches, racing to see who could remove the silk fastest, knowing that creamed corn was their reward for the tedious work. Candied nuts sparkled like jewels in crystal dishes at 1950s holiday gatherings, their sweet glaze catching light and tempting every guest who passed. Housewives transformed ordinary walnuts, pecans, or almonds into irresistible treats using nothing more than sugar, cinnamon, and egg whites beaten until frothy. The nuts were tossed in the sweet mixture, spread on baking sheets, and roasted until the coating hardened into crunchy shells. Children sneaked handfuls whenever adults weren't watching, unable to resist the combination of warm spice and toasted nut flavor. The aroma filled houses for hours, cinnamon and caramelized sugar announcing that Christmas preparations were underway. These nuts cost little to make, especially when bought in bulk during fall harvests, but they looked expensive enough for fancy entertaining. Candied nuts traveled well in gift tins, lasted for weeks, and stretched a modest food budget into impressive hospitality. They represented the 1950s housewife's genius for creating abundance from simplicity. Sugar cookies, cut into Christmas shapes, became the holiday tradition that stretched a few cups of flour and sugar into dozens of edible decorations. Grandmothers rolled dough thin to make supplies last longer, then pressed cookie cutters into stars, bells, trees, and angels that children decorated with whatever was available. Sometimes colored sugar, sometimes just a fork's tine pattern pressed into the surface. The cookies were sturdy enough to hang on tree branches with ribbon loops, transforming the Christmas tree into an edible wonderland that children could raid throughout the season. Baking Day became a community event, with neighbors sharing cutters and ovens when fuel was expensive. Each family had their secret for making cookies tender, despite using less butter than fancy recipes required. Some added a splash of vinegar, others a spoonful of sour cream saved from the week's cooking. Milk toast was the ultimate comfort food that mothers made for sick children without ever consulting a recipe. This simple dish required nothing more than toasted bread torn into pieces and placed in a bowl, then covered with warm milk, a pat of butter, and a sprinkle of sugar or salt. The bread softened into something between soup and cereal, easy to digest and gentle on upset stomachs. Housewives learned this from their own mothers during childhood illnesses, and the technique never needed writing down. The warm milk soothed sore throats, while the butter added richness that made medicine go down easier. Doctors recommended milk toast for patients recovering from surgery throughout the decade. Children who grew up eating it during measles remembered the taste decades later as pure maternal love in a bowl. The dish cost almost nothing and used ingredients every kitchen stocked. Today, milk toast has vanished from American tables, replaced by canned soups that lack the personal touch. Number 23. Lard sandwich. 2 slices of white bread, a thick spread of lard, salt. That was all. In Depression-era Iowa and the wheat-farming counties of eastern Kansas, lard sandwiches were packed into lunch pails for men heading to fields that wouldn't pay until harvest. Lard cost 8 cents a pound in 1950. A 10-pound can lasted a family 2 weeks, stretched across biscuits, pie crusts, and skillets in ways your grandmother understood and modern cookbooks have never figured out. Children in rural Oklahoma carried them to school wrapped in wax paper. They didn't call it a lard sandwich. They called it a sandwich. The word in front of it was understood and left unspoken. Some families added a smear of sorghum molasses to cut the fat. Others pressed a thin slice of raw onion into it. It filled you. It kept you working. That was the whole point. Nobody looked at a boiled russet potato and thought candy. Nobody except the women who knew. The potato had to be cold. That part was non-negotiable. Mash it smooth, work in powdered sugar a cup at a time until you had a stiff dough, roll it thin on a sugared board, spread peanut butter across the surface, roll it up tight like a jelly roll, chill it, slice it. What came out looked like a pastry spiral. Pale dough swirled with brown peanut butter, cut clean into pinwheels. It tasted like peanut butter fudge. It tasted nothing like potato. Potato candy traced to Irish and German immigrant families, spread through Appalachian kitchens by Pennsylvania Dutch settlers, where peanut butter became the standard filling. In Kansas, they used walnuts. In New England, coconut. The filling changed by county. The potato dough never did. No one who didn't already know would have guessed what it was made of. That was the point. Hot, open-faced roast beef, white bread flat on a plate, overlapping slices of Sunday's leftover roast beef, then the gravy brown and glossy from drippings, flour, and beef stock, poured so generously the bread disappeared beneath it, was the kind of meal that required a fork and a knife but cost less than $1.50 and still felt like effort. In the upper Midwest, they called it a commercial. Beef commercial, turkey commercial. Diner shorthand on menus from Minnesota to Wisconsin through the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. You ordered it because it was cold and the mashed potatoes cost 30 cents extra, and you always got them. The home version was made on Mondays from Sunday's roast. The drippings scraped from the refrigerator where they'd solidified overnight into a rust-colored disc that smelled of everything good the oven had done to the meat. When the Sunday roast stopped, this disappeared with it. Beans and Franks was the meal that appeared when the grocery money ran out 3 days before payday, and nobody pretended otherwise. Hot dogs sliced into coins, stirred into a pot of baked beans, sometimes with a squirt of mustard and a spoonful of brown sugar to pull the whole thing together. Some mothers served it over white bread, others just handed you a bowl and a spoon. The kids never complained because those little hot dog rounds made ordinary beans feel like something on purpose. In the 1960s, a can of Van Camp's or B&M baked beans cost about 15 cents, and a package of Oscar Mayer Franks ran 39. For under 60 cents, you fed 4 people a hot meal that stuck to their ribs and left enough for school lunches the next day. There was no shame in it. Every family on the block had a version, and the only real argument was whether you added ketchup or left it alone. The kids who grew up on this meal remember it fondly. The mothers who served it remember why. Fried cabbage with bacon was the simple side dish that could become a meal when paired with cornbread on lean nights. Grandma would chop a head of cabbage into rough wedges, not precise, just working, while bacon sizzled in a deep skillet. She removed the crispy bacon, then added the cabbage directly to the hot grease, letting it sizzle and wilt down into something sweet and slightly charred. The cabbage cooked until some pieces turned golden brown while others stayed pale green, creating texture variations that made each bite interesting. Crumbled bacon went back in at the end along with salt, pepper, and sometimes a splash of vinegar for brightness. The dish cost almost nothing. cabbage was cheap and kept well in root cellars, bacon was rendered from home-raised hogs. But it tasted rich, satisfying, and absolutely right alongside beans or potatoes. Grandma never measured anything, adjusting by sight and taste, knowing exactly when the cabbage had reached that perfect point between raw and overcooked. Milk toast was the gentle breakfast that soothed upset stomachs, warmed cold mornings, and comforted children through fevers and growing pains. Bread was toasted until golden, then placed in shallow bowls where warm milk was poured over until the slices softened but still held together. A pat of butter melted into the warm milk, while sugar or a drizzle of honey added sweetness. Some housewives sprinkled cinnamon across the top for extra warmth. The dish was simple to the point of seeming impossible. Just bread, milk, butter, and heat. Yet it delivered a particular kind of comfort that nothing else could match. Sick children requested it because the soft texture was easy to eat, while exhausted mothers made it for themselves during quiet moments before the household woke. No recipe existed because none was needed. The proportions adjusted naturally based on the size of the bowl, the appetite of the eater, and what the morning required. Milk toast represented breakfast as medicine, nourishment as care. American chop suey had nothing to do with Chinese cooking, but everything to do with feeding hungry families cheaply. Ground beef was browned with onions and celery, then combined with elbow macaroni and canned tomatoes in one big pot that simmered until everything melted together. The dish went by different names. Some called it goulash, others called it slumgullion, but the principle was always the same. Stretch the meat with pasta and vegetables until a single pound fed 8 people comfortably. Grandmothers adjusted based on what was available, adding green peppers when the garden produced or leaving them out when money was tight. The tomato base could come from fresh tomatoes, canned sauce, or even ketchup thinned with water. Families gathered around kitchen tables with big serving spoons, filling bowls with this stew-like mixture. Children grew up thinking this was gourmet food because it was served with such love. The recipe required no measuring, just instinct passed from mother to daughter. Biscuits rose high and flaky from hands that never touched a measuring cup. Grandmas worked lard or butter into flour using their fingertips, rubbing until the mixture resembled coarse meal that they recognized by sight and feel. Buttermilk was added in a stream, the dough coming together into something that was handled as little as possible to keep it tender. The rolling pin, often a simple wooden dowel passed down through generations, pressed the dough to the perfect thickness that grandmas knew by instinct. Biscuits were cut with drinking glasses dipped in flour, each one twisted rather than pressed to help them rise. They baked in wood stoves where temperature was judged by how long a hand could stay inside the oven door. Golden brown tops and soft, layered interiors told families that breakfast was ready. These biscuits soaked up gravy, held fried ham between their halves, and carried butter and preserves to waiting mouths every morning. Cranberry orange relish appeared on 1950s Christmas tables as a jewel-toned condiment that mothers ground fresh in hand-cranked meat grinders. Raw cranberries and whole oranges, rind and all, were pushed through the blades until they emerged as chunky crimson pulp flecked with zest. Sugar was stirred in generously, then the mixture rested overnight while flavors melded into something tart, sweet, and fresh. Children who claimed to hate cranberry sauce from cans would devour this version, spooning it over turkey and sneaking extra helpings. The relish cost almost nothing, a bag of cranberries and a few oranges transformed into enough to fill multiple dishes. Housewives made it days ahead, freeing precious oven time on Christmas morning. The vibrant color brightened holiday spreads, and the sharp flavor cut through rich gravies and buttery potatoes. Some families added walnuts for crunch or a splash of brandy for grown-up depth. Cranberry orange relish proved that fresh always beat processed, even when budgets were tight. Gingerbread men marched out of ovens across America, their spiced fragrance announcing the holidays had begun even when times were desperately tight and presents scarce. The dough combined flour, molasses, ginger, cinnamon, and cloves, ingredients that were affordable and kept well in pantries throughout the year without spoiling. Grandmothers rolled the dough between sheets of waxed paper to prevent sticking without using precious flour for dusting, then cut shapes that children decorated with raisin eyes and simple icing made from powdered sugar mixed with water. Some families fashioned their own cookie cutters from tin cans, carefully shaping the metal into gingerbread men, women, and children. The cookies lasted for weeks, stored in tins, their spicy flavor deepening as they aged. Hung on trees or arranged on holiday plates, gingerbread men became edible ornaments that children were finally allowed to eat on Christmas Day itself. Scalloped potatoes with ham was a casserole Housewives assembled by instinct, layering sliced potatoes, diced leftover ham, and creamy sauce without measuring anything. The potatoes were sliced thin by hand, each cook knowing exactly the thickness that would cook through without becoming mushy. Between the layers went bits of ham from Sunday dinner, stretching one roast through multiple meals. The sauce was made from butter, flour, and milk in proportions learned by watching mothers work. Some added sliced onions between layers, while others kept it simple with salt and pepper. The casserole baked slowly until the potatoes were tender and the top turned golden brown with crispy edges that everyone fought over. This dish fed large families economically by using leftover meat and inexpensive potatoes. It could be assembled in the morning and baked before dinner, freeing housewives for other tasks. Scalloped potatoes appeared at church suppers and weeknight dinners throughout the decade. Today, this slow-baked comfort food rarely appears. Number 25. Water gravy on toast. When there wasn't any milk, butter, or meat in the house, there was still flour, water, and the drippings stuck to the bottom of the skillet from the night before. Your mother scraped those drippings loose with a wooden spoon, sprinkled flour in and stirred until it browned, then poured in water and worked it until a pale, thin gravy formed. She poured it over toast and set the plate in front of you. In the mill towns of the Piedmont and the mining camps of eastern Kentucky, water gravy was the meal that appeared on the last night before payday. It didn't have a name in most households. Families just called it gravy and bread because naming it would have made it real. Would have meant admitting out loud that the cupboard was empty. A tablespoon of bacon grease made it taste richer than it had any right to be. One skillet, 5 minutes, a handful of flour, and your family could go to bed with something warm inside them. That was enough. Saturday night was taffy night in a lot of Depression-era households, and it was entertainment as much as cooking, something to do after supper when there was no money for anything else. Brown sugar, molasses, butter, a splash of vinegar, water, cooked together in a heavy pot until a drop in cold water cracked clean between the fingers. That was the test. Not a thermometer because most kitchens didn't have one. If it cracked, you poured the batch onto a buttered plate and waited. Then you pulled it. 2 people, one end each, stretching and folding and stretching again, working air into the mass until it lightened from dark amber to pale gold and went glossy and stiff. Cut with scissors into pieces. Let it harden. The children got to pull, which meant they got to stay up late on Saturday, which was the actual point of the whole exercise. Nobody needed a recipe because the knowledge lived in the hands. When the hands are gone, the knowledge goes with them. The hot, open-faced turkey sandwich was what the week after Thanksgiving looked like before anyone invented the leftover pot pie. It was also what Tuesday looked like in any decade when whole turkeys sold for under $1 a pound, which through the post-war years into the 1970s they often did. Sliced roast turkey laid over white bread, then the giblet gravy. Neck and giblets simmered an hour before the bird went in, the stock thickened with a flour roux, finished with the pan drippings poured generously. Television dinners of the era tried to replicate this in aluminum trays. They failed. The difference was the turkey drippings. That slightly sweet mineral depth chicken drippings never matched, and the way the bread absorbed at the edges while holding structure at the center. The TV dinner industry understood the concept. It could not replicate the smell of the kitchen in the 20 minutes before this hit the table. Nobody in your mother's kitchen had ever been to Spain, but Spanish rice showed up on the table at least twice a month anyway. A one-skillet supper that required nothing more than ground beef, a green pepper, an onion, a cup of rice, and a can of tomatoes. She browned the beef first, drained most of the fat, then added the chopped vegetables and let them soften before the rice and tomatoes went in. A lid, 20 minutes on low heat, and the rice absorbed everything until each grain was stained red and swollen with flavor. Betty Crocker published a version in her 1961 cookbook that called for a teaspoon of chili powder, which most mothers either ignored or doubled depending on how their husbands felt about heat. The dish had no real connection to Spanish cuisine. The name came from the tomatoes, which somebody decades earlier had decided made anything Spanish. You ate it with a glass of milk and a slice of buttered bread on the side, and you did not ask questions about the name. Fried pork chops and sawmill gravy was the meal that stretched 2 chops into dinner for 6 when money was tight, but appetites were large. Grandma would pound the chops thin, dredge them in seasoned flour, and fry them in lard until the coating turned crispy and the meat cooked through. The chops were set aside while she worked the pan drippings into gravy, adding flour and stirring until it browned, then pouring in milk slowly while scraping up all the flavorful bits stuck to the iron. The gravy thickened into something creamy and rich, flecked with brown bits of fried coating, poured over everything on the plate. Biscuits soaked it up, potatoes swam in it, and the pork chops got a final drench before eating. This was the meal that taught children to fill up on gravy and bread so the meat could stretch further. Grandma knew exactly how thick to make the gravy, how much milk to add, when to stop stirring, all without measuring a single ingredient. Poached eggs on corned beef hash was the breakfast that turned leftover dinner into morning luxury through the magic of a runny yolk breaking over crispy potatoes. Housewives chopped leftover corned beef with boiled potatoes, onions, and seasonings, then pressed the mixture into hot skillets where it fried until a golden crust formed on the bottom. The hash was flipped in sections or stirred to create more crispy bits throughout. Meanwhile, eggs were slipped into barely simmering water, swirled gently, and lifted out when whites set around still liquid yolks. Placed atop the hash, these eggs became sauce when cut, their richness mingling with the salty beef and crispy potatoes. The dish was weekend breakfast royalty, appearing on tables when there was time to do it properly. No measurements existed because success depended on feel, knowing when hash was crispy enough, when water was the right temperature, when eggs were perfectly done. Beef and macaroni skillet was the one-pan wonder that got dinner on the table in 30 minutes flat. Ground beef was browned in a large skillet, then dry elbow macaroni was added right into the pan along with canned tomatoes, water, and seasonings. The whole thing simmered covered until the pasta turned tender and absorbed the tomato beef liquid into something rich and saucy. No separate pot for boiling pasta, no draining, no extra dishes to wash afterward. This was the meal grandmothers made when time was short and children were hungry and patience was wearing thin. The skillet went straight to the table where families served themselves from the pan. 1 pound of beef and a box of macaroni fed 6 hungry mouths without complaint. Seasonings varied by household. Some added oregano and garlic. Others kept it simple with just salt and pepper. The dish was forgiving of distracted cooks and hungry children sneaking bites before dinner was called. Cornmeal mush was humble food that grandmas transformed into multiple meals through clever preparation. The mush itself was simple. Cornmeal stirred slowly into boiling water with salt until thick enough to hold a spoon upright. Eaten hot with butter and molasses, it was breakfast that warmed bellies on cold mornings. But grandmas knew the real magic came the next day, when leftover mush was sliced from the pan where it had cooled and firmed overnight. Those slices were fried in bacon grease until golden and crispy on the outside while staying creamy inside. Fried mush appeared with eggs and sausage, topped with syrup, or served alongside soup beans for supper. The dish stretched a few cents worth of cornmeal into 2 different meals, embodying the waste-nothing philosophy of country kitchens. Children loved the contrast between the crunchy exterior and soft interior, never realizing they were eating poverty food transformed by their grandmother's skill. Peppermint stick ice cream was the pink-striped holiday sensation that 1950s housewives churned by hand in backyard freezers surrounded by rock salt and ice. The base was simple vanilla custard made richer with extra cream, But the magic came from crushed peppermint candies folded in until red ribbons swirled through white. Children took turns cranking the handle of wooden ice cream makers, their arms growing tired but anticipation building with every revolution. The candy canes came cheap after Christmas clearance sales, though thrifty housewives bought them full price. As the mixture froze, peppermint bits softened slightly while still maintaining enough crunch to surprise each bite. The finished ice cream was served in thick scoops that melted slowly, releasing waves of cool mint flavor. Some families added red food coloring for deeper pink swirls. Peppermint ice cream appeared at holiday dinners and midnight snacks stolen from the freezer. It proved that homemade always tasted better, especially when made with love. Divinity candy looked like clouds fallen from heaven and tasted like pure Christmas magic, despite being made from little more than sugar, corn syrup, and egg whites. Grandmothers boiled the syrup to precise temperature while beating egg whites to stiff peaks, then carefully folded the hot syrup into the whites until the mixture turned glossy and thick enough to hold its shape. Dropped by spoonfuls onto waxed paper, each piece was topped with a pecan half if the family could afford nuts that year. The candy was temperamental. Humidity could ruin an entire batch, making successful divinity a point of pride for skilled cooks. Children watched the transformation from liquid to fluffy white mounds with wonder, knowing these ethereal sweets appeared only at Christmas. The candy melted on the tongue with intense sweetness, lighter than air, yet deeply satisfying. Divinity represented kitchen alchemy that turned simple pantry staples into something that seemed impossible, proof that holiday magic required skill rather than money. Tomato soup cake was a chocolate-colored spice cake that housewives made using a can of condensed tomato soup as the secret ingredient. The soup added moisture and tanginess that made the cake incredibly tender without anyone guessing what was inside. Housewives mixed the soup with flour, sugar, baking soda, and spices like cinnamon, cloves, and nutmeg, creating a batter that baked into something rich. Raisins or chopped nuts were folded in when available. The cake was often topped with cream cheese frosting, though many families ate it plain or dusted with powdered sugar. This recipe spread through communities during the Depression and remained popular through the 50s. Children never suspected tomato soup was involved. They just knew the cake was delicious. The technique required no precise measurements because housewives adjusted the spices to family preference. Tomato soup cake represented the ingenuity of making something special from ordinary ingredients. This clever cake has largely disappeared. Number 20. Macaroni and tomatoes. A box of elbow macaroni, a can of stewed tomatoes, a pat of butter, and sometimes a pinch of sugar. That is dinner. The tomatoes and the pasta cooked together in one pot, the macaroni absorbing the tomato brine until it went soft and orange and thick. In the rural South, particularly across Alabama and Mississippi, this was a Depression-era staple that never quite left the table. Families in Appalachian coal towns added a splash of milk to make it creamier. Farm wives in Georgia made it with fresh tomatoes in summer and switched to canned in winter without changing a single thing. A box of macaroni was 11 cents in 1953. A can of stewed tomatoes was a dime. Dinner for 6 for under 25 cents. If you grew up eating this, the taste is still in your memory right now. Warm and sharp and just slightly sweet, like summer in a bowl. Nobody wrote it down. That was the whole point. If you had to look it up, you weren't ready to make it. Cornstarch pudding was cornstarch and sugar stirred dry in a pot. Then boiling water poured in slow while you whisked hard to keep out lumps, held over heat until the mixture thickened and went clear. If there was milk, you used milk and got something closer to a creamy blancmange. If there was no milk, you used water and it still set up smooth and clean and faintly sweet. Vanilla at the end if you had it. Nutmeg on top if you had that. Rita Van Amber documented it in her book on Depression cooking from the 1930s. 3 ingredients, cooked together, served cold. The women who made it called it dessert and meant it. They made it for sick children who needed something gentle. They made it when the pantry was spoken for everywhere else. The spoon scraped the bowl clean every time. The Western egg sandwich lived in the middle ground between breakfast and lunch that the 1970s always seemed full of. Scrambled eggs cooked with diced ham, green bell pepper, and white onion, just set enough to hold together, spooned onto thick white bread or a Kaiser roll while still warm. The story involves railroad workers heading west through Denver, the ham and eggs as portable protein, the peppers as whatever grew nearby, and whether accurate or not, it became a short-order counter-staple through the post-war decades, appearing on coffee shop menus from Ohio to Oregon without explanation. Your grandmother made it on Saturday mornings when the eggs needed to be used. She never called it a Denver sandwich. She called it eggs with the leftover ham. You haven't made it since she stopped cooking. Your father knew this dish by a name that could not be repeated at the dinner table, the one the soldiers called it in the mess halls of World War II, where it showed up on metal trays so often that men dreamed about it decades after they came home. Creamed chipped beef on toast started with a small glass jar of armor-dried beef, so salty your mother soaked the thin slices in warm water twice before she tore them into pieces and stirred them into a butter and flour roux. Milk turned it into gravy, black pepper finished it, and the whole thing got ladled over toast. White bread, always white bread. By the early 1960s, Stouffer's and Banquet both sold frozen versions in boil-in-bag pouches, but the homemade kind had a richness the freezer aisle could never match. The dish survived because it cost next to nothing and fed a family on pantry staples alone. Your mother made it without apology, and if anyone complained, she reminded them their father ate worse in the Pacific. Cracklin' bread was cornbread elevated by the precious remnants of hog butchering, when nothing from the animal went to waste. After rendering lard from pork fat, Grandma saved the crispy brown bits left behind, cracklings that tasted like concentrated pork flavor. She stirred them directly into cornbread batter made from cornmeal, buttermilk, and a little lard, creating something richer than plain cornbread could ever be. The cracklings softened slightly during baking, but kept enough chew to provide texture in every bite. Grandma knew exactly how many cracklings to add without measuring, adjusting for how much fat remained on them. This bread appeared only after hog killing, usually in late fall, making it a seasonal treasure that families anticipated all year. The technique required understanding pork fat, knowing when cracklings were ready, and trusting your eyes over any written measurement. It was knowledge that lived in doing, not reading, and it made ordinary cornbread extraordinary. Cheese dreams were the breakfast sandwiches that turned simple ingredients into something children begged for and adults secretly craved. Housewives buttered bread slices, layered sharp American cheese between them, then fried the sandwiches in butter until bread turned golden and cheese melted into stretchy strings. The technique was identical to grilled cheese, but the name carried morning magic. Calling them dreams made breakfast feel special. Some housewives added thin slices of ham or tomato, but purists kept to bread, butter, and cheese alone. The sandwiches were cut diagonally, the better to see the molten cheese oozing from the center, and served hot when the contrast between crispy exterior and gooey interior was at its peak. No recipe existed because every housewife knew proper grilled cheese by the sound of butter sizzling, by the color of toasting bread, by the moment when cheese reached perfect meltiness. Spanish rice with ground beef brought warmth and color to tables across America during the mid-century years. Ground beef was browned with onions and green peppers. Then uncooked rice was stirred in and toasted slightly before canned tomatoes and water were added. The pot simmered covered until the rice absorbed all the liquid, turning tender and deeply flavored with tomato and beef. Cumin, chili powder, and garlic gave it warmth that made the kitchen smell like something special. This one-pot meal required no side dishes and could feed 6 people from a single pound of meat. Grandmothers learned it from neighbors, from church cookbooks, from watching their own mothers work without measuring spoons. The dish was forgiving, adjusting to whatever vegetables were available. Leftovers went into tortillas for lunch the next day, or were simply reheated with a splash of water. It represented practical cooking that turned cheap ingredients into something families genuinely craved. Soup beans simmered all day on the back of wood stoves, filling homes with the earthy promise of supper. Grandmas sorted through dried pinto beans by hand, discarding stones and shriveled beans with practiced fingers that needed no light to work by. The beans soaked overnight in cold well water, then cooked slowly with a ham hock or piece of fatback that gave the broth its silky richness and depth. No recipe existed because none was needed. Grandmas knew by the smell when beans were ready, by the way they yielded to a wooden spoon pressed against the pot's side. The cooking liquid thickened into pot liquor so flavorful that families drank it straight from cups or sopped it up with bread. Beans were served over cornbread or rice, with chopped raw onion and a splash of vinegar on the table for those who wanted them. This single pot fed families for days, reheated each evening until nothing remained but memories. Homemade eggnog was the creamy Christmas elixir that 1950s housewives whipped up in large bowls for holiday entertaining. Fresh eggs were separated, the yolks beaten with sugar until thick and pale, while whites were whipped into stiff peaks. Rich whole milk and heavy cream were stirred into the yolk mixture. Then the fluffy whites were folded in until the nog became impossibly light. Nutmeg was grated fresh across the surface, its warm spice perfuming each sip. Children received cups without the rum or bourbon that adults added to theirs, though the virgin version was equally beloved. The drink appeared at tree trimming parties, Christmas Eve gatherings, and holiday brunches throughout December. Making it required time and muscle. Hand whisking eggs to proper consistency was real work, but the result outshone any carton from the dairy case. Housewives who mastered eggnog earned reputations that spread through neighborhoods. The creamy richness coated tongues and warmed bellies, making everyone feel the abundance of the season. Vinegar candy emerged as a Depression-era miracle that proved sweetness could come from almost nothing at all. When families couldn't afford fancy ingredients, grandmothers discovered that sugar, butter, and plain white vinegar could be boiled together into hard candy that shattered between teeth with surprising brightness. The vinegar provided a tangy note that cut through the sweetness, creating something that tasted far more sophisticated than its humble origins suggested. Poured into buttered pans and scored while still warm, the candy broke into jagged shards that filled candy dishes throughout the holidays. Children sucked on pieces slowly, making each one last because they knew how precious even simple sweets were during lean times. The recipe required no special equipment, just a heavy pot, a candy thermometer if you were lucky, or practiced eyes that could judge the soft crack stage by how the syrup dripped from a wooden spoon. Welsh rarebit was a cheese sauce poured over toast that housewives made for quick suppers when time and groceries ran short. Sharp cheddar cheese was melted with butter, a splash of beer or milk, and seasonings like mustard and Worcestershire sauce until smooth. The sauce was spooned over thick slices of toasted bread, sometimes with a poached egg on top for extra protein. The dish felt elegant despite its simplicity, the rich cheese sauce transforming ordinary toast into something special. Housewives made it by feel, knowing how much liquid created the right consistency. Welsh rarebit appeared on dinner tables when the icebox was nearly empty, and shopping day was still ahead. Children loved the gooey cheese, while adults appreciated how quickly it came together. The technique passed through families without written recipes because the method was straightforward. Welsh rarebit represented the art of elevating simple ingredients into satisfying meals. This quick supper dish has largely disappeared from American kitchens. But years before the desperation pies reached their peak, American kitchens had already worked out how to bake without eggs by turning to the pantry shelf. Applesauce cake traced back to colonial New England, where the apple harvest came once a year and home cooks stewed and strained it into sauce specifically to stand in for eggs and fat in baked goods meant to keep through winter. A World War I recipe called for no eggs and only 2 tablespoons of butter, applesauce doing all the binding work. By the Depression years, the recipe had been tested across 2 generations, and the women who made it knew exactly what they were doing. Flour, spices, a little oil, the sauce, dense, moist, kept well in a tin. Cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, raisins if you had them. Walnuts off the backyard tree if you didn't. Boxed spice cake mixes pushed it off the counter in the 1950s, and it quietly stopped appearing. Very few people under 60 know what it actually tastes like. If you grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, you know what an egg foo young sandwich is. If you grew up anywhere else, you've never heard of it. An egg foo young patty, eggs beaten with bean sprouts, scallions, and pork, pan-fried in a loose disc, between two slices of white bread with mayonnaise, lettuce, and dill pickles, a combination that should not have worked but absolutely did. The sandwich took root in St. Louis in the 1940s when Chinese-American restaurants began adapting for Midwestern customers who wanted familiar flavors in portable form. The briny pickle against the savory egg was the whole argument for its existence. By the 1970s, it was a fixture at old-school St. Louis lunch counters, surviving into the 80s before gradually fading. A handful of establishments still make it today. Everywhere else, it simply never happened. A community's gift to its neighbors that never reached the rest of the country. If scalloped corn was built for crowds, stuffed green peppers were built for the family table. Each one a small, self-contained meal packed tight and simmered until the pepper walls went soft enough to cut with a fork. Your mother hollowed out the peppers, mixed ground beef with cooked rice and a beaten egg, packed the filling in firm, and set them upright in a deep pot with canned stewed tomatoes poured around the base. The lid went on and the pot simmered for what felt like hours, the kitchen filling with a sweet, beefy steam that clung to the curtains. By the 1960s, stuffed peppers appeared in nearly every women's magazine and community cookbook in America, each version slightly different. Some added Worcestershire sauce, others a handful of shredded cheese on top in the last 5 minutes. The dish required patience more than skill, and the mothers who made it best were the ones who never rushed the simmer. One Quora commenter, remembering the era, wrote simply that her mother simmered them for hours in stewed tomatoes, and that she no longer makes them since her father passed away. Soup, beans, and cornbread was the Monday dinner that anchored countless rural weeks across Appalachia and the South. Grandma soaked dried pinto beans overnight, then simmered them all day with a ham bone saved from Sunday's dinner, letting the marrow and meat scraps infuse the broth with smoky richness. She added nothing but salt, pepper, and maybe an onion quartered and thrown in whole. The beans cooked until creamy, their liquid thickening into rich pot liquor, prized as much as the beans themselves. Meanwhile, cornbread baked in a preheated cast-iron skillet, its bottom forming a golden crust from the hot bacon grease coating the pan. The combination provided complete protein, stretching a single ham bone into meals for 8 or more. Grandma never timed anything. She knew the beans were done by their appearance, the cornbread ready by its smell. This meal required only patience and the accumulated wisdom of generations who survived on exactly this. Stewed tomatoes on toast was the breakfast that brought garden abundance to the morning table in a form both savory and satisfying. Housewives heated canned or fresh tomatoes in a saucepan with butter, sugar, salt, and pepper until the mixture bubbled and thickened slightly. The warm tomatoes were spooned over buttered toast, their juices soaking into the bread while chunks of fruit provided texture. Some added a sprinkle of basil or a dash of Worcestershire sauce for depth. The combination of sweet acidic tomatoes against rich buttered bread created a flavor profile that woke up taste buds without overwhelming them. This was particularly popular in rural homes where canned tomatoes lined cellar shelves, preserved from summer gardens. Children sometimes resisted the unfamiliar combination, but adults appreciated how the dish stretched pantry staples into something that felt like a complete meal. No recipe was needed because proportions adjusted naturally to how many slices of toast waited on plates. Hamburger gravy poured over biscuits was the meal that made empty pantries feel abundant. Ground beef was browned in a skillet, then flour was sprinkled over the meat and stirred until it coated everything evenly. Milk went in slowly, stirred constantly until the mixture thickened into rich, creamy gravy studded with seasoned beef. The gravy was ladled generously over split biscuits baked fresh or pulled from yesterday's batch. Salt and pepper were the only seasonings needed, though some grandmothers added a dash of sage. This dish cost pennies, yet delivered satisfaction that expensive meals couldn't match. It was breakfast, lunch, and dinner, depending on the day. Farm families ate it before dawn chores, while city families stretched it across weeknight suppers. The gravy could be thinned with more milk to feed extra mouths when company arrived. Children scraped their plates clean while parents exchanged knowing glances about the budget. Gravy from pan drippings was an art form that transformed every meat dish into something extraordinary. After frying chicken, pork chops, or country ham, grandmas never washed the skillet. That fond stuck to the bottom was liquid gold waiting to be unlocked. Flour went into the hot fat, stirred constantly with a wooden spoon until it turned golden brown and smelled like toasted nuts. Milk or water was added slowly, the mixture thickening as grandmas stirred with the patience that only years of practice could teach. The gravy absorbed all the flavors left in the pan, becoming silky and rich without any seasoning beyond salt and pepper. It was poured over biscuits for breakfast, mashed potatoes for supper, and sometimes eaten straight from the spoon when no one was watching. No two batches tasted exactly alike because the meat changed, the drippings varied, and grandmas adjusted by instinct rather than recipe. This gravy tied meals together and made simple food feel abundant. Ribbon candy appeared in glass bowls on coffee tables across America, its delicate swirls of red, green, and white catching tree light like edible stained glass. Store-bought versions cost just pennies per box, making them affordable luxury that housewives displayed with pride. Children carefully selected their favorite color, snapping off pieces to let dissolve slowly on their tongues while sweetness spread through their mouths. The thin, folded strips shattered between teeth with a satisfying crack that announced the holidays had arrived. Grandmothers kept special dishes reserved just for ribbon candy, and refilling them became part of Christmas ritual. The candy required no refrigeration and lasted for weeks, making it a practical decoration that doubled as a treat. Kids sneaked pieces when adults weren't watching, leaving telltale sticky fingerprints on furniture. Ribbon candy represented simple 1950s pleasures, beautiful, affordable, and shared freely with anyone who walked through the door. Ribbon candy required patience and skill but cost little more than sugar and food coloring to create something that looked like it came from fancy confectionery shops in the city. Grandmothers boiled sugar syrup to the hard crack stage, divided it into portions tinted different festive colors, then pulled and folded each strip while still warm into wavy ribbons that caught light like stained glass windows in a church. The finished candies were displayed in glass dishes where their colors could shine brightly, impressing visitors who never guessed such beauty came from a kitchen with bare cupboards. Making ribbon candy was often a grandmother's closely guarded specialty, her movements practiced and confident as she worked the hot sugar before it cooled and hardened into unusable lumps. Children watched in wonder as plain syrup transformed into something that seemed far too beautiful to eat but tasted wonderful anyway. Cubed steak with gravy was a weeknight dinner that housewives made by pounding cheap cuts of beef until tender, then frying them and smothering them in homemade gravy. The meat was seasoned with salt and pepper, dredged in flour, and browned in hot fat until a crust formed on both sides. The steaks were removed while the gravy was made in the same pan, using flour and milk stirred into the drippings until thick. Everything went back together, the steaks simmering in gravy until the meat was fork tender. This dish turned tough, inexpensive meat into something that felt almost luxurious. Housewives knew by sight when the gravy was thick enough and by touch when the meat was tender. The technique required no written instructions because mothers stood beside daughters at the stove, teaching the feel of proper gravy consistency. Served over mashed potatoes or egg noodles, cubed steak stretched the grocery budget while satisfying appetites. This practical dish has largely disappeared. Number 24. Bread and milk. A bowl, a few slices of day-old white bread torn into rough pieces, warm milk poured over the top, and sometimes a pinch of sugar. That was supper. In rural homes across Tennessee, Kentucky, and the Ozarks of Arkansas, this was the meal that showed up when the week hadn't finished, but the money had run out. The bread swelled soft in the warm milk, turning the bowl into something almost custard-like if you gave it 2 minutes to sit. A loaf of bread cost 16 cents in 1952. A half gallon of milk was 43 cents. For a family of 5, that is dinner for under 60 cents. No stove required, no pots to wash. Old-timers across the southern mountains still eat bread and milk before bed, the way their grandmothers did back then. Not because they have to, because it tastes like the safest night of their childhood. Lazy Daisy cake showed up in so many community cookbooks through the 1930s that food historian Ann Byrne found 7 nearly identical versions in a single collection, all tracing to snowdrift, shortening advertisements, and newspaper columns that women clipped and traded and tucked into recipe boxes for 2 generations. The cake was a simple oatmeal butter cake baked in a square pan. The frosting was the thing. Brown sugar, butter, cream, and shredded coconut spread raw across the warm cake straight from the oven, then slid under the broiler for 30 seconds. Not a minute, never a minute, because it went from golden to scorched in the time it took to look away. What came out was a caramelized coconut crust over a soft oat cake, warm and served straight from the pan. You've probably never had it. Your great-grandmother made it at least twice a month and thought nothing of it. The recipes that felt ordinary to the people who made them are always the hardest ones to get back. The hot dog split down the middle and broiled with cheese answered the question of what to do when the buns ran out or when someone wanted something hot without starting a whole production. A standard ballpark or Oscar Mayer cut lengthwise without going all the way through, the interior pressed open, a line of yellow mustard laid in, then a strip of American cheese folded into the groove. The whole thing slid under the broiler until the cheese bubbled and the hot dog skin tightened and split at the edges. Some households put it back in a bun afterward. Others served it without, the hot dog standing alone on the plate with the cheese pooled in the split. An open-faced situation that required a fork and constituted a real meal in the households that served it that way. Children learned which version their household made and understood the other version was wrong. The correct procedure was not a recipe, it was just how it was done. If Welsh rarebit was toast dressed up, Egg's goldenrod was toast in its Sunday best. Simple enough for a child to eat and pretty enough that your mother took a quiet pride in serving it. She hard-boiled the eggs, separated the whites from the yolks, chopped the whites into small pieces, and folded them into a white sauce she made in the same pan she used for everything. That creamy mixture went over buttered toast, and then, the part that gave the dish its name, she pressed the bright yellow yolks through a sieve so they fell like golden dust over the top. The dish was named for the goldenrod wildflower, and in certain Catholic households through the 1950s and 60s, it showed up nearly every Friday when meat was off the table. It cost almost nothing. It fed the whole family. And the woman who made yours probably learned it from her own mother, who learned it from hers, none of them ever writing it down because there was nothing to write. You just knew. Dumplings and wild greens was the spring celebration meal when foraged foods meant fresh nutrition after months of preserved vegetables. Grandma would gather whatever was ready: dandelion greens, lamb's quarters, wild mustard, washing them thoroughly in multiple water changes. The greens simmered with salt pork until tender, their pot liquor becoming rich and slightly bitter. Meanwhile, she mixed dumpling dough by feel, flour, a bit of lard, enough liquid to hold together, then dropped spoonfuls directly into the bubbling greens. The dumplings puffed and cooked through, absorbing the flavors of greens and pork. This dish required knowing which wild plants were edible when they were tender enough to eat, and how to cook dumplings that were light rather than leaden. No measurements existed because the greens varied every gathering, and Grandma's hands knew what her eyes confirmed. It tasted like the earth waking up, like survival, like spring itself served in a bowl. Scrapple was the breakfast meat that proved Pennsylvania Dutch thrift could create something genuinely beloved from parts others discarded. Made from pork scraps, cornmeal, and spices cooked into a loaf, scrapple was sliced thick and fried until the exterior turned impossibly crispy while the interior stayed soft and savory. Housewives heated skillets with butter or bacon fat, laid in the gray slices, and waited patiently while crusts formed. Rushing meant mushy scrapple, and no proper cook would serve that. The finished slices were served alongside eggs, with maple syrup for those who liked sweet-savory contrast, or simply with salt and pepper. Children either loved or hated the distinctive flavor. but those who loved it craved it forever. The dish required no recipe because slicing thickness and frying time were learned through practice, through watching mothers who watched their mothers. Beef and noodle casserole was the covered dish that showed up at every church potluck and neighborhood gathering. Ground beef was browned with onions, combined with egg noodles and canned cream of mushroom soup, then baked until bubbling and golden on top. The soup created a creamy sauce that held everything together while the noodles absorbed those beefy flavors. Crushed potato chips or buttered breadcrumbs went on top for crunch, turning a simple casserole into something children fought over. This was the dish grandmothers made when feeding a crowd or when grieving families needed meals delivered. The casserole traveled well in foil-covered pans and reheated without losing its appeal. 1 pound of beef stretched to serve 12 when the noodles and soup did their work. Families relied on it for weeknight suppers assembled in minutes. The recipe existed only in memory, adjusted each time based on what the pantry held. Wilted lettuce salad appeared when gardens overflowed with tender greens that wouldn't keep. Grandmas picked leaf lettuce in the cool of morning, washing it in basins of well water and tearing it into pieces by hand. Hot bacon grease was poured directly over the greens, wilting them instantly while the fat coated every leaf with smoky richness. Vinegar and a pinch of sugar went into the skillet next, creating a warm dressing that was spooned over the wilted leaves. Some grandmas added sliced green onions or hard-boiled eggs to stretch the dish further. The salad was eaten immediately while still warm, before the greens turned soggy and lost their texture. This wasn't fancy restaurant food. It was country wisdom that transformed abundant lettuce into something special. Children who turned their noses up at raw salad would eat wilted lettuce gladly because the bacon made everything better. The dish appeared only during growing season, making each serving feel precious and fleeting. Date nut bread emerged from 1950s ovens as dense, dark loaves studded with wrinkled fruit and crunchy walnuts that housewives sliced thin and spread with cream cheese. Chopped dates were soaked in boiling water until they softened into sticky sweetness, then folded into simple batter made rich with brown sugar and eggs. The bread required no fancy ingredients, just pantry staples combined with dates that came cheap in bulk bins. Baked in coffee cans or loaf pans, the bread developed a caramelized crust that gave way to moist, fruit-speckled interior. Children loved the chewy pockets of sweetness between bites of nutty bread. Housewives made multiple loaves as Christmas gifts, wrapping them in cellophane and ribbon for teachers, neighbors, and relatives. The bread kept for weeks and actually improved with age as flavors melded. Served at breakfast or tea time, date nut bread represented the kind of practical luxury that defined 1950s Christmas. Affordable yet impressive, homemade yet gift-worthy. Fruitcake soaked in whatever spirits the family could spare became the Christmas tradition that proved celebration didn't require wealth or expensive fancy ingredients from city stores. Grandmothers saved dried fruits all year long. Raisins purchased cheap in bulk. Citrus peel carefully dried on sunny windowsills. Apple rings preserved from autumn harvests and stored carefully in the root cellar through the long, cold winter months. These treasured fruits were combined with flour, eggs, molasses, and warm spices into heavy batter that baked low and slow until dense and dark. The finished cakes were wrapped in cheesecloth soaked with brandy, bourbon, or even homemade wine, then stored for weeks as flavors mellowed and deepened beautifully. One fruitcake could last the entire holiday season, sliced thin because its richness meant a little satisfied even the hungriest guest at the family Christmas table. Porcupine meatballs were ground beef mixed with raw rice that cooked inside the meatballs, the grains poking out like little quills when done. Housewives combined ground beef with uncooked rice, egg, onion, and seasonings, then formed the mixture into balls and simmered them in tomato sauce. As the meatballs cooked, the rice absorbed liquid and expanded, creating the spiky appearance that gave the dish its name. Children were fascinated by the texture and often requested these meatballs over plain ones. The tomato sauce was usually made from canned tomato soup or crushed tomatoes thinned with water. Nothing fancy but deeply satisfying. The dish stretched a pound of ground beef into enough food for a large family by adding the filling rice. Housewives knew by experience how much rice to add and how long to simmer until the grains were tender. Porcupine meatballs appeared on weeknight tables throughout the 50s, a fun and economical dinner that children actually enjoyed. This clever dish has largely disappeared from family cooking. Number 22. Cornmeal mush. 4 parts water to 1 part cornmeal and salt. That was breakfast across the Midwest and the Mountain South for generations. Your grandmother stirred it over low heat for half an hour, then poured it into a loaf pan to cool and firm overnight. In the morning, she sliced it cold, fried those slices in a cast iron skillet until a golden crust formed on both sides, and set them on the table with a drizzle of sorghum. A bag of cornmeal cost 19 cents in 1953. It fed your family breakfast for 3 days. In Pennsylvania Dutch communities across the Cumberland Valley, fried mush was a tradition that goes back further than anyone living can remember. In the Appalachian hollows of North Carolina, it was simply called mush and served without ceremony. No one called it polenta. No one put a price on it at a restaurant. It was something you made with cornmeal and water when the eggs ran out, and it was free, and it was simple, and it worked. Started it the night before, always the night before. Raisins into a pot with brown sugar, hot water, lard, cinnamon, and cloves, boiled 3 minutes until the kitchen smelled like a church basement in the best possible way. Then it cooled overnight. By morning, the liquid had thickened and the raisins had swelled fat with spice, and that was when the flour went in. 3 cups, no eggs, no milk, just the raisin mixture and a spoon of baking soda dissolved in warm water. Boiled raisin cake had been called war cake since the First World War, when the United States Food Administration published it in a 1918 pamphlet on conservation sweets. The Depression women didn't need the pamphlet. They already knew. If you had raisins and brown sugar and lard and thyme, you had a cake that kept for weeks in a tin, worth sending to a son stationed far away. The recipe survived. The women who stirred it without measuring are gone. The tuna melt on an English muffin arrived in American kitchens riding the same wave that brought the English muffin into mainstream grocery stores. Thomas's had begun national distribution through the 1950s, and by the 60s, the Nooks and Crannies pitch had made them a household staple. The combination was almost inevitable. Tuna salad made with Hellmann's, mixed with celery and a little onion, spooned onto a split and toasted English muffin half. A slice of cheddar laid over the top, everything back under the broiler for 3 to 4 minutes until the cheese darkened at the edges. The sound was the whole experience. That faint sizzle when the broiler heat reached the cheese, followed by the smell that filled the kitchen in the last 90 seconds before you pulled it. You could hear when it was ready. The people who knew what they were listening for are mostly gone now. The sound of canned salmon patties hitting a skillet of hot butter, that sizzle, that pop of moisture against fat, was one of those kitchen sounds you never forget. A steady, crackling hiss that meant supper was 10 minutes away. Your mother cracked open a tall can of pink salmon, picked through it with a fork to pull out the skin, and mashed the soft bones right in because she said they were good for you, full of calcium. She mixed in a beaten egg, crushed saltine crackers, a squeeze of lemon if there was one, and shaped the patties by hand. Never too thick, never too thin. They fried golden in the skillet, crispy on the outside and soft in the center. And you ate them with ketchup if you were a kid or tartar sauce if you were trying to act grown. The whole meal, salmon patties, canned corn, and instant mashed potatoes, ran about 60 cents in 1963. Every mother had her own ratio of cracker to salmon, and if you asked her how much, she would just say enough. Fried salt pork and milk gravy was the morning-to-night staple that sustained farming families through endless days of labor. Grandma would slice thick pieces of cured pork belly, fry them slowly in cast iron until the edges curled crispy and the fat rendered into liquid gold. The meat was set aside while she worked magic with that hot grease, whisking in flour until it turned golden brown, then pouring in fresh milk from the morning's milking. She stirred constantly until the gravy thickened into something creamy and rich, seasoned with nothing but pepper and instinct. This gravy was ladled over biscuits at breakfast, potatoes at dinner, cornbread at supper. The salt pork provided protein and fat that kept bodies warm through hay, baling, and tobacco cutting. It was never fancy, but it was filling and made entirely from ingredients the farm provided. The skill was in knowing exactly when the flour had cooked enough, when the gravy had reached perfect consistency. Knowledge that lived only in a grandmother's hands. Apple fritters were the breakfast treat that transformed ordinary fruit into golden, crispy pillows of sweetness that children and adults alike could not resist. Housewives peeled and chopped apples, then folded them into simple batter made from flour, eggs, milk, and a touch of sugar. Spoonfuls were dropped into hot oil where they puffed and turned golden, the apple pieces softening inside while the exterior crisped. Lifted from the oil and drained briefly, the fritters were dusted with powdered sugar or drizzled with maple syrup while still warm. The smell of frying dough and cooking apples filled kitchens with an aroma that brought everyone to the table before being called. These were autumn breakfasts when apples overflowed from orchards, but housewives made them year-round using whatever apples were available. No recipe was consulted because batter consistency was judged by how it coated the fruit, and oil temperature was tested with small drops of batter. Here is my challenge. Make one of these this week. The skillet supper, the creamed whatever was left, the fried potatoes your mother made on a Tuesday without thinking about it. Do not look up a recipe. Do not measure anything. Just stand at the stove and cook the way she did. By feel, by memory, by the smell of butter in a hot pan and the sound of something starting to brown. Because these meals did not disappear because anyone stopped being hungry. They disappeared because the women who made them were never asked to write anything down. Nobody thought to stand in that kitchen with a pencil and say, "Tell me exactly how you do this." And when those women were gone, the meals went with them. A dozen eggs cost 57 cents in 1964. A loaf of bread was 22 cents. Ground beef was 63 cents a pound. For less than $2, your mother fed the whole family and made it look like nothing. Tell me in the comments which meal your mother made without a recipe. I want to know if anyone else's mother could make a full dinner out of whatever was in the refrigerator without ever looking at a page. Because these are not just meals. They are proof that the most important recipes in American cooking were never written down. They lived in the hands of women who cooked every single night and never once got credit for it. Now, I am not a doctor or a dietitian. This is not medical advice. But the women who made these meals understood something about feeding a family that no cookbook, no cooking show, and no internet recipe has ever been able to replace.